Welcome to the American Security Council Protecting Our Freedoms podcast. The mission of the American Security Council is to educate and engage American citizens on national security matters, economic security matters, and the need for moral leadership in the United States of America. Please enjoy the podcast.
Good morning. Welcome to Protecting Our Freedoms, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. It's thanks to be back in 2021. 2020 was a rough year, but I think we also learned that our freedoms are under fire. So we're going to be talking a lot about protecting our freedoms, along with our mission of exposing the dangers of China, the culture war, and the need for cyberspace security. I'm your host, Joy Votrobek, Senior Research Analyst here at the American Security Council Foundation. And today's topic is going to be protecting our freedoms, but freedom of navigation of the seas. And I have back with us today Senior Fellow Alan Dowd. Welcome back, Alan.
Great to be back, Joey. Good to hear your voice. And like you said, good to start a new year.
Yes. And you have written an article in December on freedom, or the Navy needing more fleets and more ships to deter China, and which you're arguing possibly for reinstating the retired First Fleet to join the Seventh Fleet in the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
If you can walk us through that a little bit, why the First Fleet is needed.
Sure. Well, the Seventh Fleet, it begins kind of with the burdens that have been placed on the Seventh Fleet, which overwatches a massive expanse of the Pacific and part of the Indian Ocean. And the Navy Secretary under President Trump during the Trump administration, a man named Kenneth Braithwaite, proposed in the last quarter of last year, near the in the fall, late fall, winter, said it's time to reactivate the First Fleet to relieve some of the burden on the Seventh, and he made a good case for it, a very reasoned case. He said that the First Fleet would help secure what he called the crossroads between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. And he emphasized the term reactivate, which is we're not building he wouldn't be creating a new fleet. The First Fleet existed from 47 until 73, when most of its mission was subsumed into the Seventh Fleet. So he just thought it was time, and a growing number of maritime experts and U.S. Navy thinkers think the same thing. And of course, just given how you introed, it is about China. It's certainly about China. You wouldn't need the Seventh Fleet to be relieved of a burden if China wasn't doing kind of so many of the things it's doing, making mischief, and then also really acting aggressively.
And their new law there that they passed, allowing their Coast Guard to fire on anyone they feel is a threat to their South China Sea claims.
Right. Yes, that's a big deal. And, this is something, Joy, that we've talked about at American Security Council, and this kind of China's very smart, the way they are deploying their strength, deploying their power, and also in deploying it in a way that's kind of what we call gray zone or hybrid. And when you use a Coast Guard, that falls kind of down into the it's under the threshold it's considered under the threshold of a military. So this is very clever of them to say that we're going to use Coast Guard units to do this, this, and that. They also are sending Coast Guard units way out and harassing fishing boats of the Vietnamese and the Filipinos, and those things. Really, it's clever. And of course, I would submit the way to deal with that is to deal with the Coast Guard, the Chinese Coast Guard, like it's the Navy, because that's what it's acting like. So what you call something's not as big a deal as what it does, So, but that you're right, the Coast Guard, and that was a declaration they made as a warning, as a threat. And that threat needs to be challenged. And that's why the U.S. what you mentioned at the outset, the FONOPs, or freedom of navigation operations, are so important. The United States has been doing the FONOP mission since the late 70s. There's nothing new here. And we've been through now, 4 straight administrations conducting FONOPs directly targeting Chinese illegal claims in the South China Sea. And the Biden administration has taken the baton up from the Trump, just as the Trump did from the Obama, just as Obama did from the Bush 43. So this is a continuity of policy, which is a good thing. And it's necessary to keep those sea lands open.
Yes, I would agree with you. We definitely need to deter China from any denial of access to the freedom of the navigation of seas, but
Right.
both as a national security issue and economic issue as well.
That's
Not
right.
just us, but many countries.
That's exactly
and
right.
in your proposal of reinstating the first fleet, would you say, though, that some of these ships are outdated? And I know in your article you said that it'd be less costly, however, to reinstate them than to build new ships.
Right. Well, I did make the case that we don't just need a new fleet. We need ships in the new fleet. We can create a fleet, and not, I say that with a bit of it's actually too serious to laugh about, but it makes me smile or smirk, because just if you create a fleet and it doesn't have enough ships, then it's not going to do any good. So definitely, if you're going to stand up or reactivate the first fleet to relieve the seventh, so the seventh can focus on the Pacific, and the first can focus on the Indian and some of the approaches toward the Malacca Straits and things. You got to have more ships in it. So how do you do that? You can build them, which the Trump administration and the Congress codified. A lot of people don't remember this, but Trump administration and Congress codified it. A Democratic Congress, 355 ship Navy, which would be a buildup of around 50 more now ships. 55 more maybe. That's one way to do it, but that's expensive, as you said, Joy. But there are other things that you can reactivate. You can reactivate fleets. You can reactivate old ships. We do have a mothball fleet. You and I were talking the other day. You and many other Americans have seen them. There's a mothball fleet in Philadelphia. There's a mothball fleet in the state of Washington. There's some mothballed ships in Hawaii. They're mothballed for a reason. They were kept for parts, for sure, and some of them are being cannibalized and used as necessary, but they're also kept as an emergency. Since America was a power projecting country, going back to the 1900s, we built up a navy as we became more engaged in the world. World War I and World War II, we produced enormous amounts of ships, and many of those ships were mothballed and then pulled back into service as needed. It's happened many times. The Korean War, we reactivated a whole bunch of ships from World War II. Reagan famously reactivated ships to get to his 600 ship fleet goal in the 1980s. And the experts, the Navy experts say that it can be done today, and you can reactivate a ship much quicker and much more cheaply than you can build one. So that is an option to get ships, back at sea. That being said, there's really only 50 or so ships in this mothball fleet, and some of them may not be usable from the research I've done. But many of them could be. Some dozens of them could be updated, upgunned, as they say, and manned and then put out there.
That was going to be my question, was if they were usable. So you're saying some of them are.
Yes, some of them are. There's, from what the research I've seen in Philadelphia, Bremerton, Washington, Pearl Harbor, there's usable frigates, cruisers, and several amphibious assault ships. There's 2 full-blown aircraft carriers, only one of which the experts say is usable. That's the Kitty Hawk. The Enterprise is a lot of them have just been so cannibalized for parts, Joy, that they can't really be used. But some of them can be. By the way, we just touched on another thing. Another way you can grow the fleet is you extend the life of warships, and that, to have a warship go for 50 years instead of 30 is very doable, exceedingly doable, according to the experts I've read about the naval experts, captains, and admirals who are retired now, who say this, who recognizes you, Joy, and I, and the rest of the team at ASCF, that you need to have presence on the sea to deter China. It's not just about saying words. It's not just about creating a fleet. We've got to have presence.
Right.
And then, of course, you and I have touched on this before. The plan put out in the last 2 years is to have at least 10% of the fleet, of the future fleet, be unmanned.
Yes.
And so that's something that can be done very cheaply, and it can be done very rapidly. There are lots of tests and lots of unmanned naval assets that are being put to sea and tested, and I think we are on the edge of right on the leading edge of seeing a large percentage, 10% of the force becoming unmanned. We've already seen it happen in the Air Force very rapidly. By about 2005, there was a real rapid pickup in drones, and that's now happening on the Navy side too.
Yeah, I believe I read the defense spending bill for 2021 has allowed now for the unmanned program.
And it's, there's a lot of reasons for it. It's cheap, and it doesn't put U.S. personnel in harm's way. You can do things with an unmanned vehicle, or whether it's in the air, on the ground, or at sea, or undersea. I just read yesterday about an undersea unmanned attack vehicle. You can do things with unmanned ones that you really can't with manned when it comes to putting Americans in harm's way.
And that makes sense. You also said there is some problems with having unmanned.
Yes, I do think, it does. And we've dealt with it a little bit, I say, as a society. Unmanned warfare does raise, and I've written about this at American Security Council and elsewhere, for the Army War College parameters. It does raise questions and I think challenges, not insurmountable, but things that a free society has to deal with. And we're just now kind of dealing with them. There's constitutional issues. I think there are ethical, moral issues that come up with unmanned warfare. I think there are issues regarding, when we lead the way, we, the American people, we, the West, other countries and other peoples follow. And just as I predicted, it wasn't some profundity when I predicted this in the early 2000s, that we're going to open up I would submit a Pandora's box with unmanned air warfare. And at some point, other countries are going to be using this. And in the air, at least, unmanned systems are less dependable. We know that it's by orders of magnitude, an F-16 or an F-15 versus a Reaper or a Predator.
Right.
They are not as dependable. We've seen them start on their own. We've seen them veer off course and go into enemy territory. Those kinds of things generally don't happen with manned aircraft. But the point I've always made, Joy, about unmanned systems is, if the best military on earth, the most technologically advanced and the richest country on earth sometimes has these unmanned systems make mistakes, imagine what will happen when less technologically advanced, less nations that have less care for rules of law and norms of behavior get a hold of them. And it will cause, I think, a lot of issues. And we've seen that started to happen. Azerbaijan, Armenia, we've seen it happen in Syria, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and it really is a Pandora's box. But the box is open. Now we need to try to deal with that. There's some good to these systems, but there are challenges.
Yes, you mentioned that, and that certainly is.
And those will be at the sea. Those challenges will exist at the sea too, just as they do in the air.
And you had also, along with this article, when you were talking about the mothballing, I was reading a little where you had said also another option would be to expand on the Lightning carriers. Could you talk a little bit about that?
The Lightning carriers, this is a concept that some smart thinkers in the U.S. Navy are talking about. Lightning, they're called Lightning. The Lightning carrier concept is so called because what they've done is they have taken, it's not a theory anymore. They've done it now. They've taken amphibious assault ships, which, as you know, Joy, and I'm sure most of our listeners know, they look, to the novice like an aircraft carrier, but they're actually much smaller. They are designed for just what they say, amphibious attack, sea to land attack, to deploy usually Marines with the backing of some small amounts of air to amphibious assault, unlike a big supercarrier, which is designed to strike from a great distance and project power from sea onto land or other places. But the Lightning carrier takes the amphibious assault ship and takes the helicopters off the assault ship and puts vertical takeoff F-35s, which are F-35B variants, onto there. They can load them with as many as 20 of these, and so an F-35 is known as the Lightning, by the way. So that's why they call this the Lightning carrier. But the F-35's nickname is the Lightning. So this concept, they're seeing it increases the carrier capabilities in a sense. We grow our carrier fleet in a way, though that's not nearly the punch that a super carrier has. It's still a big punch, and it can bring quite a sting. As one admiral said, they can sting the enemy with these carriers. So that's an interesting and clever way. Americans are clever, and
it is a clever way. And I think you also said in there too that it gives us the advantage of not having to rely on a host nation. Oh yeah,
that's one thing that critics of the carrier, because of their price tag, always say. Carriers are $9 billion, $10 billion, $13 billion, on and on. They're expensive. They are, but you don't ever have to ask a country for overflight rights. You don't have to ever ask a host nation, can we use your base? The biggest headache we deal with that right nowadays is Turkey, right? I mean, they veto very haphazardly whenever it's at their whim, when we can use, when we can't use a base that we pay for, a base that we maintain at Incirlik. But it happens elsewhere too, So, but yeah, carriers, you don't have to. And so my argument has always been those billions that you pay on the front end pay off in spades at the back end, because you don't have to ask a host country, beg a host country. And let's be honest, we often basically just open the checkbook when a host country raises a stink about using an air base there. We end up having to buy them off. So those things you don't have to deal with at all. It's a floating piece of American sovereignty, and it can strike anywhere on Earth.
So there are some other good options out there.
That's right. And better yet, not even strike, sometimes just sit and deter. That's really what you and I are talking about when it comes to China. None of us want to go down the path of a war with China. Even a small skirmish with China could escalate into some unthinkable stuff. What you want to do is deter them. And I think that's what they want of us, by the way, too. They don't want to fight a war with the United States.
I would agree, yes. Now, if we, these mothballed ships, if we put them back out, will we be able to modernize them enough to be equivalent with China's
that's the question, and that's
military?
Yeah, that's the question. China now has the largest Navy on Earth. A lot of people don't know that. I think most of the readers and listeners to your show know that, but now it's the largest Navy on Earth, and it's modern. They're building a new. They've deployed a new Navy. They aren't mothballing things. Now, that being said, some of their aircraft carriers they've bought from the Soviets. They are building their own aircraft carriers now, too. Or I say Soviets, they bought them when it was the Soviet Union and now the Russians. But and they've modernized those, too, though. But their fleet is new and modern. And if you were to take out mothballed ships, you're going to have to update them, upgun them, and the question then is the guys in the green eye shades, is that worth the cost? It could be that's actually cost prohibitive to do that versus just building a new one, or certainly just building and deploying an unmanned ship, And there's also, by the way, Joy, a third kind of option, and you're hearing this a lot, lightly manned, which they have so many computer systems, so many automated systems on these ships that they, instead of having a crew of 200, they might have a crew of 40 or something, which is a lot different too, because as you know, one of the biggest line items in the DoD's budget is the cost of training, feeding,
Right.
Equipping the humans, which are the most important asset in our military, of course. But so lightly manned is another thing. But yeah, that's the real question. I don't have an answer for that. It seems to me that even the guys who wear the green eye shades don't have an exact answer for that about whether it's cheaper to just build a new one or to pull some out of the fleet and modernize them, like you said.
Mm-hmm. I think you also mentioned maybe possibly bringing in our Army to work with the Navy.
Right. That's something, we always hear this term in the last 20 years, especially those of us like you and me are around the military and work and talk with folks in the service. We always hear this term jointness. It's all about the joint force, jointness. And they're a lot more joint than they used to be. But as you and I know, silos are a big deal and they have their turf. But if they really believe in jointness, and I mean they being the guys who run the Pentagon and the men and women who run the Pentagon, there's a lot of assets outside the Navy that can help us in our maritime mission. And our main maritime mission is to keep the sea lanes open, deter bad guys, and ensure, like you said right at the outset, freedom of navigation. Americans have been for freedom of navigation since Thomas Jefferson sent, a fleet over to the northern Africa to fight the Barbary pirates. So, but there's a lot of assets in the Army actually, and the Coast Guard that could be used to strengthen and muscularize what the Navy is trying to do. The Army has a Navy. The Army has a fleet of 300 vessels that are seaworthy. I mean, a lot of people don't know that. And if we could have increased Army-Navy jointness, that could enable a more dynamic use of Army assets in the ocean. We also could arm Coast Guard cutters. The Chinese are doing it. And by the way, Joy, there's nothing new under the sun, as the book of Proverbs says. We armed Coast Guard cutters in the 1980s with anti-ship weapon systems to kill ships. They weren't armed with light guns to stop drug runners. They were armed with heavy-duty ship-killing systems. So it can be done. It has been done. It's just a matter of do we want to do it. I'm saying this, my premise is we have to get more ships. So I'm trying to find the quickest way to get more ships that can help us deter our enemies.
Right, any way possible, yeah.
Right. And then there's the other thing related to what you asked, I just want to touch on. There's a lot of thinkers in the Army and in the Marines who say, hey, let's just start strapping anti-ship missiles onto the top sides, artillery systems onto the decks of non-combat Navy ships and make every Navy ship a combat ship. And this is they're testing this. They're just strapping Army and Marine artillery, ship-killing artillery, or artillery that can fire ship to shore on the backs of these non-combat vessels, and it's another way, to deter. That's the key. You have to, of course, the system has to work. You don't want to have a Potemkin system that is not real, but if the system is tested and it can work, I think that's another option to grow the fleet quick.
Yeah, and I think that's good to have numerous options in case we come to, as we discussed previously, that it's maybe not worth mothballing or taking these mothball ships and modernizing them.
And it may not be. That's right. I mean, they're certainly not moving quickly on that, Joy. That's been an option for years now. We really just haven't seen that option taken by several administrations now, or by at least several years in two administrations.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out with either the mothballing or the other options that we had just discussed here.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
but
speaking of that,
we certainly want to deter and keep our freedom of navigation of the seas. And Alan, I think we're running out of time for today's podcast. But I want to thank you very much for coming on and speaking with me about that.
Always great to talk to you, Joy. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And check out, to our viewers, check out Alan's 2 new articles on our website, www.ascf.us. And we would always appreciate your donation at www.ascf.us/donate. Again, we appreciate your time, and until next time, be safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye.